The rain came down in sheets so thick that Xavier O'Sullivan could barely see his horse's ears. But what stopped him cold on that muddy trail outside San Jose, California, wasn't the weather, it was the sight of a young woman kneeling in the downpour. Her body curved protectively over something small and trembling in the grass. It was May of 1882, and Xavier had been riding back to his ranch after 3 days of delivering horses to a buyer in the neighboring county. The storm had rolled in from the Pacific with a vengeance that afternoon, turning the California landscape into a blur of gray and green. He'd been thinking about nothing more than a hot meal and dry clothes when he spotted her, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face and shoulders. At first he thought she might be injured, the way she was hunched over, but as he urged his gelding closer, he realized she was sheltering something beneath her. "Madam," Xavier called out over the roar of the rain, swinging down from his saddle, "are you hurt?" She looked up at him with eyes the color of warm honey, and even through the rain, he could see they were filled with fierce determination rather than fear. "The foal," she said, her voice shaking from cold but steady in purpose. "She was born maybe an hour ago. The mare got spooked by the lightning and ran off. I cannot leave her here to die." Xavier moved closer and saw what she was protecting. A tiny bay foal still wet from birth, its legs folded beneath it and its whole body shivering. The newborn couldn't have weighed more than 80 pounds, and without its mother or shelter, it wouldn't survive the night. The woman had positioned herself to take the brunt of the wind and rain, but she was losing the battle against the elements herself. Without a word, Xavier shrugged out of his heavy oilskin coat and draped it over her shoulders. She tried to protest, but he cut her off. "You are no good to that foal if you freeze to death," he said firmly. "I've got a barn about 2 miles west of here. We need to get both of you inside." She looked at him for a long moment, assessing him with those striking eyes, then nodded. "How do we move her? She is too young to walk far." Xavier was already calculating. The foal was small enough that he could carry it if he had to, though it would be awkward on horseback. But there was another way. He pulled a length of rope from his saddlebag and fashioned a makeshift sling. "We will wrap her and I will carry her across my saddle. You can ride behind me. What is your name?" "Maisie Sullivan," she said, helping him ease the coat off herself and then back on after he'd stripped down to his shirt, which was immediately soaked through. Together, they carefully lifted the foal into the sling. The little creature made a weak sound of protest, but didn't have the strength to fight them. "Xavier O'Sullivan," he replied as he worked, securing the foal across his saddle. "Hold on to her steady while I mount up." Maisie did as instructed, her hands gentle but firm on the foal. Xavier swung himself up, settling the small horse carefully, then reached down to pull Maisie up behind him. She settled against his back, one arm around his waist and the other helping to steady their precious cargo. Even through the cold and wet, Xavier felt the warmth of her pressed against him, felt her heartbeat against his spine. The ride to his ranch seemed to take forever, though it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. The rain continued its assault, and Xavier felt Maisie shivering behind him despite the coat. He pushed his gelding as fast as he dared on the slick ground, mindful of the fragile life they carried. When the dark shape of his barn finally emerged from the downpour, relief flooded through him. He dismounted quickly, then helped Maisie down before carefully lifting the foal from its sling. The little thing was barely conscious, its breathing shallow. "Get the door," he called to Maisie, and she ran ahead, throwing open the wide barn doors. Inside, the darkness was warm and dry, filled with the comforting smell of hay and horses. Several heads poked out of stalls to investigate the commotion. Xavier carried the foal to an empty stall he'd been using for storage and laid her down on fresh straw. Maisie was already beside him, her hands moving over the tiny horse, checking for injuries. "She is so cold," Maisie said, her voice tight with worry. "We need to warm her up and get her dry." "I will get blankets and towels," Xavier said, already moving. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, kept the tack room well stocked with supplies. He returned moments later with an armful of clean horse blankets and several old towels. Together, he and Maisie worked to dry the foal, rubbing her coat vigorously to stimulate circulation. The little horse began to respond, lifting her head and making small sounds. "That is it," Maisie murmured encouragingly, her voice soft and soothing. "You are all right now. You are safe." Her hands moved with practiced confidence, and Xavier realized she knew her way around horses. This wasn't just some city woman who happened upon an animal in distress. She knew what she was doing. Once they had the foal as dry as possible and wrapped in blankets, Xavier turned his attention to Maisie. Her lips had a blue tinge, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "Your turn," he said firmly. "You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death." She looked up at him, and he saw her about to protest. "I do not have anything else to wear," she said. "I will find something," Xavier replied. "Wait here." He strode out of the barn and through the rain to his house, a modest 2-story structure he'd built himself 5 years ago when he'd bought this land. Inside, he grabbed some of his own clothes, a shirt and trousers that would be far too big for her but would be dry and warm. He also snatched a quilt from the spare bedroom and his last dry coat. When he returned to the barn, Maisie was still with the foal, stroking its neck and talking to it in low, gentle tones. "Here," he said, handing her the bundle. "You can change in the tack room. There is a lantern in there." She took the clothes gratefully and disappeared into the small room. Xavier used the time to check on his other horses and to find a bucket, which he filled with warm water and mixed with a bit of mare's milk powder he kept for emergencies. When Maisie emerged, swimming in his clothes with the trousers rolled up several times and the shirt hanging off her shoulders, Xavier felt something shift in his chest. Her hair, freed from its pins, hung in damp waves past her shoulders, and without the distraction of her fear and the rain, he could see she was beautiful. "The foal needs to eat," she said, apparently oblivious to his stare, "but without her mother." "I have this," Xavier said, showing her the bucket and a clean rag. "It is not ideal, but it should keep her going until we can find a nursing mare or get proper supplies." Together, they coaxed the foal to take the milk-soaked rag, letting her suck the liquid from it. It was slow work, but gradually, the little horse began to show more life, her dark eyes brightening and her movements becoming stronger. As they worked, Xavier learned Maisie's story. She was 22 years old, the daughter of a rancher whose land bordered the southern edge of Xavier's property, though they'd never met. Her father, William Sullivan, had died 6 months ago from a fever, leaving the ranch to Maisie and her younger brother Thomas, who was 17. They'd been struggling to keep the place running, their small herd of horses their only real asset. "I was out checking the broodmares when the storm hit," Maisie explained, her fingers gentle as she stroked the foal's face. "I found this one's mother. She belongs to us, but she was wild with fear from the lightning. The foal had just been born, and before I could get them both to shelter, the mare broke away and ran. I have been looking for her for an hour before I found this little one." "We will look for the mare at first light," Xavier promised. "But right now you need food and rest. When did you last eat?" Maisie's silence was answer enough. Xavier stood, dusting straw from his knees. "Stay with the foal. I will bring something out." "You have done enough already," Maisie protested, but Xavier could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "I am not leaving you to collapse in my barn," he said, more gruffly than he intended. "Besides, I need to eat too, and Mrs. Chen will have my hide if I let a guest go hungry." The house was dark and quiet. Mrs. Chen left at 5 each evening to return to her own family in town. But she'd left a pot of beef stew on the stove, and there was fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Xavier loaded everything onto a tray along with 2 bowls, spoons, and cups of hot coffee, then made his way back through the rain to the barn. He found Maisie exactly where he'd left her, curled up in the straw beside the foal, the quilt wrapped around both of them. She'd fallen asleep despite herself, one hand still resting on the little horse. Xavier stood there for a moment, just watching her. In sleep, the worry and determination had smoothed from her face, leaving her looking younger and more vulnerable. Her lashes cast shadows on her cheeks, and her breathing was deep and even. "Miss Sullivan," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Maisie, her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she looked disoriented. Then she saw him and sat up quickly, the quilt falling away. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall asleep." "You needed it," Xavier said, settling down cross-legged in the straw and setting the tray between them. "Now eat." The stew was still warm, and Maisie ate with the kind of hunger that spoke of too many skipped meals. Xavier watched her between his own bites, noting the fine bones of her wrists, the shadows under her eyes. She and her brother were in trouble, he realized. Worse trouble than just one missing mare. "Tell me about your ranch," he said when she'd slowed down enough to sip her coffee. "What are you running?" Maisie wrapped her hands around the tin cup, savoring the warmth. "We have about 15 horses right now, down from 30 when my father died. We had to sell some to pay his debts and the funeral expenses. Thomas tries hard, but he is still learning. My father did not have time to teach him everything before the fever took him." "And you?" Xavier asked. "You clearly know horses." A small smile touched her lips, the first real one he'd seen from her. "My father taught me everything. He used to joke that I was born on horseback. I can break, train, and breed with the best of them, but that does not matter much when you are a woman trying to deal with buyers who will not take you seriously or banks that will not extend credit without a man's signature." Xavier felt a flash of anger on her behalf. He'd built his own ranch from nothing over the past decade, and while it hadn't been easy, he'd never faced the particular obstacles that confronted a woman trying to do the same. "That mare that ran off, is she valuable?" "She is one of our best," Maisie said quietly. "Smart, strong bloodlines, good temperament. This was her 3rd foal. If I lose her—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. Xavier understood. Losing that mare could be the blow that ended the Sullivan ranch for good. "We will find her," Xavier said with conviction. "And your foal here is safe. Tomorrow, after the storm clears, we will search. I know this land well." Maisie looked at him with those honey-colored eyes, and Xavier saw gratitude there, but also something else. Suspicion, maybe, or wariness. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." It was a fair question. Xavier considered it, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "My father died when I was 19, he finally said, "left me and my mother with nothing but debts. If people had not helped us, then given my mother work, gave me a chance to prove myself, I would not have this place now. I guess I am just paying it forward." The wariness in Maisie's expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "Thank you. Truly. I do not know what would have happened to this little one if you had not come along." "You would have found a way," Xavier said, and he meant it. He'd seen the fierce determination in her, the way she'd put herself between the foal and the storm without hesitation. Maisie Sullivan was a survivor. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, finishing their meal and checking on the foal, who seemed to be doing better. Her breathing was steady, and she'd even tried to stand once, though her legs were still too wobbly to hold her weight. Maisie talked to her constantly, encouraging her, promising her that her mother would come back soon. It was well past midnight when Xavier finally convinced Maisie to come up to the house and sleep in a proper bed. She resisted at first, not wanting to leave the foal, but the little horse was sleeping peacefully, and Maisie was swaying with exhaustion. "The foal will be fine for a few hours," Xavier assured her, "and you will be no good to her if you make yourself sick. Come on." He led her through the rain, which had finally begun to ease, to the house. Inside, he showed her to the spare bedroom, which was simple but clean, with a bed that Mrs. Chen kept made up for the occasional overnight guest. "There is water in the pitcher if you need it," he said. "And the necessary is just down the hall. Sleep as long as you need to." "What about you?" Maisie asked, stifling a yawn. "I will bunk down here on the sofa," Xavier said. "That way I can hear if anything happens with the horses." Maisie nodded, then surprised him by reaching out and touching his arm. Even through his shirt he felt the warmth of her hand. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything. I will not forget this." He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would capture the strange feeling that had settled in his chest since he'd first seen her protecting that foal in the rain. But all that came out was, "Get some rest." She smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and closed the door. Xavier stood there for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of her moving around the room, then forced himself to walk away. He checked on the fire, added another log, and settled onto the sofa with a blanket. But sleep was a long time coming. He kept seeing Maisie's face in his mind, the determination in her eyes, the gentleness of her hands with the foal, the way she'd looked in his too big clothes with her hair down. Xavier had been married once briefly, when he was 23. Sarah had been the daughter of a local merchant, pretty and sweet, but she'd hated ranch life. She'd endured it for 2 years before running off with a traveling salesman, leaving Xavier with annulment papers and a bitter lesson about choosing a partner who shared your values. That had been 6 years ago, and he'd been alone since, focusing on building his ranch into something successful. He told himself he was content with that he didn't need anyone else. But lying there in the dark, listening to the rain on the roof and thinking about the woman sleeping upstairs, Xavier felt something shift. It was too soon to call it anything, too soon even to acknowledge it fully. But it was there, undeniable as the sunrise that would come in a few hours. When dawn broke, gray and misty but no longer pouring rain, Xavier was already up and dressed. He checked on the foal, who greeted him with a soft nicker and was standing on her own, though still unsteady. He gave her more milk, pleased by how eagerly she took it, then fed his other horses and mucked out stalls. He was just finishing when he heard the barn door open and turned to see Maisie. She'd braided her hair and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, and she looked rested despite the short night. "How is she?" she asked immediately, coming to kneel beside the foal. "Stronger," Xavier reported. "She stood up on her own and has a good appetite. That is a positive sign." Maisie ran her hands over the foal's legs and body, checking her with practiced efficiency, then nodded with satisfaction. "She's going to make it. Now we just need to find her mother." They left the foal in the stall with food and water and set out on horseback, just as the sun was beginning to burn through the mist. Xavier let Maisie ride his best mare, a steady gray named Silver, while he took his gelding, Dusty. The storm had left the landscape transformed, with standing water in every depression and the creek running high and fast. They rode toward the southern boundary of Xavier's land, where it met the Sullivan property. Maisie led the way, pointing out where she'd last seen the mare. "She was heading west when she bolted," she explained. "Away from the thunder." They searched for hours, quartering the ground methodically, looking for tracks or any sign of the missing horse. The sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and beginning to dry the muddy ground. It was nearly noon when Maisie suddenly pulled up, standing in her stirrups and shading her eyes with one hand. "There," she said, pointing to a stand of oaks about a quarter-mile distant. "I see something brown." They urged their horses forward, and as they got closer, Xavier saw it too. A bay mare, standing in the shade of the trees, her head low and her sides heaving. As they approached, she lifted her head and whinnied, a sound of distress and confusion. "Easy, girl," Maisie called out, dismounting while they were still a good distance away. She walked forward slowly, hands out, talking in that same soft, soothing voice she'd used with the foal. "Easy now, I've got you." The mare was clearly exhausted and dehydrated, her coat rough with dried sweat and her eyes showing white. But she recognized Maisie's voice and scent, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed herself to be caught. Maisie ran her hands over the horse, checking for injuries, then turned to Xavier with relief in her eyes. "She is all right. Scared and tired, but all right. Let us get her back to the barn," Xavier said. "She needs water and rest, and she needs to see her foal." Leading the mare, they made their way back to Xavier's ranch. The reunion between mother and baby was immediate and joyful, the mare nickering frantically and the foal answering with her own high-pitched sounds. Within minutes, the foal was nursing, her tail whisking with contentment while her mother stood protectively over her. Maisie watched with tears in her eyes, and Xavier felt his own throat tighten. There was something profound about witnessing the simple rightness of it, mother and child reunited after their ordeal. "I should get them home," Maisie said after a while, though she made no move to leave. "Thomas will be worried sick. I did not make it back last night." Xavier had been thinking about this. The foal is still too weak to make the journey to your place, and the mare needs more rest. Why not leave them here for a few days? Let them recover their strength. Maisie hesitated, and Xavier could see her pride warring with practical sense. "I cannot ask you to do that." "You are not asking, I am offering," Xavier said. "Besides, you will need to come by twice a day to check on them anyway. Might as well leave them where they are comfortable." Finally, Maisie nodded. "Just for a few days, and I will work to pay you back." "I can help with your horses or muck stalls or whatever you need." "We will figure something out," Xavier said, though he had no intention of asking her for payment. "Come on, let us get you home so your brother knows you are alive." They rode together toward the Sullivan Ranch, which was about 5 miles south of Xavier's land. As they traveled, Maisie pointed out landmarks and told him about the area, her love for the land evident in every word. When they topped a rise and the Sullivan homestead came into view, Xavier felt a pang of sympathy. The place had clearly seen better days. The house was small and in need of paint, the barn leaning slightly to one side and the fences patched with mismatched wood. A young man came running out of the barn as they rode up, his face a mixture of relief and anger. He had Maisie's honey-colored eyes and the same dark hair, though his was cut short. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded before Maisie had even dismounted. "I have been out of my mind worrying." "I am sorry, Tommy," Maisie said, using what was clearly a childhood nickname. "Star's foal came early during the storm, and Star bolted. I was trying to save the baby when Mr. O'Sullivan here found me." Thomas turned to Xavier for the first time, really seeing him, and his expression shifted to suspicion. "O'Sullivan, from the ranch to the north." "That is right," Xavier said, keeping his voice calm and friendly. He understood the boy's protectiveness of his sister. "Your sister saved that foal's life. She was sheltering it in the storm when I came along. The mare and baby are both safe at my place, recovering." Some of the tension left Thomas's shoulders, but not all. You stayed out all night at his place." He asked Maisie, and there was accusation in his tone. Maisie's cheeks flushed, but her voice was firm. "I stayed in his guest room while he slept on the sofa, and we were both fully clothed and chaperoned by 15 horses. Mr. O'Sullivan has been nothing but a gentleman and has probably saved Star and her baby's life. You will treat him with respect." Thomas had the grace to look abashed. "I am sorry, sir, and thank you for helping my sister. I just worry about her." "I understand," Xavier said, meaning it. "Family is important. Your sister is welcome to visit the mare and foal anytime. They will be ready to come home in a few days." He took his leave after that, but not before Maisie had extracted a promise from him to send word if anything changed with the horses. As Xavier rode back toward his ranch, he found himself already thinking about when he would see her again, already looking forward to it. Over the next week, Maisie came to Xavier's ranch every day, arriving in the morning and often staying until evening. She helped with the mare and foal, but she also made herself useful in other ways, working with some of Xavier's young horses that needed training, repairing tack, and generally proving herself invaluable. Xavier found himself arranging his work so that he was wherever she was, drawn to her presence like iron to a magnet. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives and their dreams. Xavier learned that Maisie had wanted to breed horses that could work cattle, but also be gentle enough for children to ride, creating a line that would be prized across California. He told her about his plans to expand his herd and eventually breed horses for the army, which was always looking for good mounts. "You could do both," Maisie said one afternoon. They were in the training ring, working with a 2-year-old colt that Xavier was gentling. "Breed for temperament and versatility. The army would love that, and so would private buyers." "That would take good bloodlines," Xavier said, watching as she ran her hands down the colt's legs, accustoming him to being touched, "and careful selection." "Star has those bloodlines," Maisie said. Her sire was an Arabian that came around the Horn on a ship from Boston, and her dam was a Spanish Mustang with bloodlines going back to the conquistadors. That is why losing her would have been so devastating. We cannot afford to replace that kind of quality. An idea was forming in Xavier's mind, one that had been growing for days. "What if we worked together?" he asked. "Combined our herds, our knowledge, your bloodlines with my facilities and capital." Maisie looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Xavier said. "You know horses as well as anyone I have ever met. Better, even. And you have something I do not have, breeding stock with real value. Together, we could build something significant." "That is a generous offer," Maisie said slowly. "But I am not a charity case, Xavier. I would need to bring equal value to the partnership." "You would," Xavier assured her. "More than equal. I have land and money, but you have knowledge I am still learning and horses I could never afford to buy outright. We would be partners in every sense." Maisie bit her lip, thinking. Xavier could see the hope in her eyes warring with caution. "I would need to discuss it with Thomas," she finally said. "He is a partner in our ranch, too." "Of course," Xavier agreed. "Take your time, think it over, but the offer stands." They didn't speak more about it that day, but Xavier could tell Maisie was considering it. He found himself hoping she would say yes, and not just for business reasons. Over the past week, his feelings for her had grown from attraction to something deeper. He loved the way she laughed at his stories, the way her face lit up when she was working with the horses, the way she challenged him when she disagreed with him. He loved her strength and her kindness, her intelligence and her determination. It was the start of June when Maisie brought Thomas to meet with Xavier. The young man was nervous but trying to hide it, sitting stiffly in Xavier's parlor while Mrs. Chen served coffee and cookies. Xavier laid out his proposal in clear terms. They would combine the herds, with the Sullivan horses being integrated into Xavier's ranch. Maisie would serve as breeding manager and head trainer, with full authority over all horse-related decisions. Any profits would be split fairly, with the Sullivans receiving 40% and Xavier 60%, reflecting his greater initial investment but acknowledging their crucial contribution. "What about our land?" Thomas asked. "The homestead. You would keep it," Xavier said. "Or you could sell it if you prefer and use the money to buy into the partnership more fully. That would be your choice." Thomas looked at Maisie, and some silent communication passed between them. "Can we have a day to think about it?" he asked. "Take as much time as you need," Xavier replied. That evening, after the Sullivans had left, Xavier sat on his porch watching the sunset and wondering if he'd pushed too hard, too fast. But when Maisie rode up alone the next morning, a smile on her face, he knew what her answer would be before she spoke. "We accept," she said, dismounting and walking up to the porch. "Thomas and I talked it over with Mama's picture and Papa's memory, and we think he would have approved, but I have one condition." "Name it," Xavier said, standing to meet her. "I want to buy into the partnership properly, not just with the horses. Thomas is going to sell our land to the Henderson family. They have been wanting to expand and have offered a fair price before. We will use that money to become equal partners with you. 50-50. Xavier opened his mouth to argue that it wasn't necessary, but the look in Maisie's eyes stopped him. This was about pride and respect, about being a true partner and not a dependent. 50-50, he agreed, holding out his hand. She took it, her grip firm and her palm warm against his. "Partners, then?" "Partners," Xavier echoed, but as he looked into her eyes, he knew he wanted more than that. He wanted everything. Over the following weeks, they worked together to combine the operations. The Sullivan horses were moved to Xavier's ranch, with Star and her foal, whom Maisie had named Dawn for the gray morning light. She was born and settled happily into their new home. Thomas came along initially, but proved to be more interested in farming than ranching. Eventually, he took his share of the land sale money and bought a small fruit orchard closer to San Jose, visiting often but clearly happier working with trees than horses. Xavier and Maisie fell into an easy partnership, their skills complementing each other perfectly. She had an eye for bloodlines and temperament that he lacked, while he had the business acumen and connections to find buyers for their horses. But more than that, they simply enjoyed working together, their conversations ranging from serious discussions about breeding strategies to playful banter and shared laughter. It was late July, during a hot afternoon when they were working in the barn to escape the sun, that things between them shifted. They'd been discussing whether to breed one of Xavier's mares to a new stallion in the area when Maisie had climbed up into the hayloft to throw down fresh bales. Xavier was below stacking them when he heard her yelp. "Maisie, are you all right?" he called up, already moving toward the ladder. "I am fine," she called back, but her voice sounded strained. "I just stepped wrong and twisted my ankle a bit." Xavier climbed the ladder in seconds and found her sitting in the hay, her boot off and her hands wrapped around her left ankle. "Let me see," he said, kneeling beside her. "It is nothing," Maisie protested, but she let him take her ankle into his hands. He probed gently, relieved when she didn't cry out in pain. It didn't seem to be broken or even badly sprained, just twisted. "You should stay off it for the rest of the day," he said, but he didn't move his hands from her ankle. The hayloft was dim and quiet, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that came through the gaps in the walls. Maisie was close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes, could smell the scent of lavender soap she used. "Xavier," she said softly, and the way she said his name made his heart beat faster. "Maisie, I need to tell you something," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "These past couple of months working with you, getting to know you, it has been the best time of my life. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and I think about you every moment we are apart. I know we are partners in business, but I want more than that. I want to court you properly, if you will let me. I want to see if what I am feeling might be something you feel too." For a long moment, she just looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she smiled. "Xavier O'Sullivan, I have been waiting for you to say something like that for weeks now. I thought I was going to have to hit you over the head with a 2x4 to get your attention." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Is that a yes?" "That is definitely a yes," she said, and then she was leaning forward and he was meeting her halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that felt like coming home. She tasted like the peppermint tea she'd been drinking and like sunshine and like everything good in the world. Xavier wrapped his arms around her, careful of her ankle, and deepened the kiss. She responded with enthusiasm, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he admitted. "Me too," Maisie whispered. "From that very first night when you gave me your coat and stayed with me in the rain. I knew then that you were someone special." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the hayloft, talking and kissing and making plans for the future. Xavier told her about his failed first marriage, wanting her to know everything about him, and Maisie shared her fears about being able to keep her father's legacy alive, and her relief at finding someone who understood her passion for the horses. "I never thought I would find someone who could be both a partner in work and in life," she said, curled against his side with her head on his shoulder. "Most men want a wife who will stay in the house and have babies and never have an opinion about anything important." "I do not want most men," Xavier said, then corrected himself with a laugh. "I mean, I do not want what most men want. I want you exactly as you are, strong and smart and not afraid to disagree with me when you think I am wrong." "Good," Maisie said firmly, "because I am not changing." "I would not want you to," Xavier assured her. Their courtship over the rest of the summer and into fall was unconventional by San Jose standards. They continued to work together every day, but now there were stolen kisses in empty stalls and hands held while walking between paddocks. Xavier took Maisie into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, proudly introducing her as both his business partner and the woman he was courting. Some people gossiped about the propriety of it all, but Xavier didn't care, and neither did Maisie. Thomas approved of the match, telling Xavier in no uncertain terms that he'd better treat his sister right or face the consequences. Mrs. Chen, who'd been hoping Xavier would settle down again, was delighted and started making wedding plans before Xavier had even proposed. And the horses, who perhaps understood more than people gave them credit for, seemed content with the new arrangement. It was October, with the California hills turning gold and the air finally cooling from the summer heat, when Xavier decided it was time to make things official. He spent a week planning, wanting everything to be perfect. He arranged for Thomas to take Maisie into San Jose on a Saturday afternoon, claiming he needed her help selecting fabric for new curtains. While they were gone, Xavier worked frantically to set up his surprise. When Maisie returned in the early evening, Thomas made an excuse to leave quickly, and Xavier met her at the barn. "Come with me," he said, taking her hand. "I want to show you something." He led her to the training ring, where he'd hung lanterns from every post, creating a circle of soft light in the gathering dusk. In the center of the ring stood Dawn, now 5 months old and growing into a beautiful young horse. She wore a garland of wildflowers around her neck, and tied to the garland was a small velvet box. Maisie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Xavier, what is this?" "This is me asking you to marry me," Xavier said, leading her into the ring. Dawn walked over to them, well trained enough to come when called, and Xavier untied the box from her neck. He dropped to one knee in the dust of the ring, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Maisie Sullivan, you came into my life protecting something small and helpless in a storm, and you have been a force of nature ever since. You are my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Maisie's face, but she was smiling brighter than the lanterns around them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Xavier stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her while Dawn nickered softly beside them, and the stars began to come out overhead. It was perfect, exactly as he'd hoped. They were married in November on Xavier's ranch, with a judge from San Jose officiating and about 50 people in attendance. Maisie wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, with her hair loose and a crown of autumn leaves. Xavier wore his best suit and could not stop grinning. Thomas gave his sister away, looking proud and a little teary. Mrs. Chen cried through the whole ceremony, and the horses, watching from their paddocks, seemed to approve. The reception was held in the barn, which they decorated with ribbons and lanterns and tables full of food. People danced to music from a hired fiddle player and toasted the newlyweds with apple cider and whiskey. Xavier danced with Maisie until his feet hurt, holding her close and whispering in her ear about how beautiful she was, how happy he was, how he couldn't wait to start their life together. When the party finally ended and the last guests had left, Xavier carried Maisie over the threshold of their home, no longer his but theirs, and up the stairs to the bedroom they would now share. He set her down gently, then cupped her face in his hands. "Hello, Mrs. O'Sullivan," he said softly. "Hello, husband," she replied. And then there were no more words for a long while, just the two of them learning each other in the soft darkness, building something new together. Their first year of marriage was everything Xavier had hoped for and more. They worked together during the days, building their horse breeding operation into something that was gaining recognition across California. Maisie's eye for bloodlines and Xavier's business connections brought them success, with buyers coming from as far as Sacramento and Los Angeles to see their horses. But it was the nights Xavier treasured most. Coming home to find Maisie cooking dinner in their kitchen, or sitting together on the porch watching the sunset, or lying in bed talking about their dreams for the future. She told him about wanting children, at least 3 or 4, who would grow up loving the land and the horses as much as they did. He told her about wanting to build a bigger barn and maybe buy the land to their east to expand their grazing area. "We are building something real," Maisie said one evening. They were curled up together on the sofa, a fire crackling in the hearth and the sound of rain on the roof. "Something that will last beyond us. A legacy," Xavier agreed, "for our children and their children." It was almost exactly a year after the night Xavier had found Maisie in the rain that she told him she was expecting their first child. She chose the moment carefully, waiting until they were checking on the spring foals, including Dawn's first sibling, another filly who'd been born without drama in the safety of their barn. "I think we are going to need to start thinking about a nursery," Maisie said casually as she stroked the new foal's fuzzy mane. Xavier was so focused on the horses that it took him a moment to process her words. When he did, his head snapped up. "What?" "Maisie, are you saying?" She was grinning at him, her eyes sparkling. "I am saying you are going to be a father. The baby should come around November, maybe early December. Xavier let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and swept Maisie into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly demanded he put her down before she got dizzy. He set her down carefully, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach, making her laugh harder. "I cannot hear anything yet," he said. "That is because the baby is still tiny," Maisie said, running her fingers through his hair. "But just wait. In a few months you will be able to feel the baby kick." Pregnancy agreed with Maisie. She continued working with the horses well into her 6th month, only stopping when Xavier and Mrs. Chen ganged up on her and insisted she needed to rest more. She chafed at the restriction but secretly seemed relieved. The summer heat was oppressive that year, and she spent a lot of time in the coolest parts of the house, sewing baby clothes and planning the nursery. Xavier was protective to the point of being overbearing, but Maisie tolerated it with good humor. "I am having a baby, not dying of consumption," she reminded him regularly. But she also held his hand when the baby kicked for the first time, watching his face light up with wonder, and she let him fuss over her when she was tired or uncomfortable. Their son was born in late November on a cold, clear night when the stars seemed close enough to touch. The labor was long and difficult, and Xavier wore a hole in the parlor rug pacing while Mrs. Chen and the midwife attended Maisie upstairs. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find Maisie exhausted but smiling, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "Meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. "He is beautiful," Xavier whispered. "You are beautiful. I love you both so much." They named him William after Maisie's father, with the middle name Xavier after his father. Little William O'Sullivan was baptized on Christmas Eve in the small church in San Jose, with Thomas standing as godfather and Mrs. Chen as godmother. The baby slept through most of the ceremony, only waking to fuss when the priest splashed water on his forehead. Parenthood changed them both. Xavier learned to function on less sleep than he'd thought possible, rocking the baby through the night when he was fussy and changing diapers with the same competence he brought to training horses. Maisie bloomed as a mother, her love for their son evident in every touch, every soft word, every careful attention to his needs, but they made sure not to lose themselves entirely in parenthood. Mrs. Chen was happy to watch William for a few hours each week, so that Xavier and Maisie could work together with the horses, or simply take a ride alone, reconnecting as husband and wife as well as parents. Those moments were precious, reminding them of who they'd been before the baby, and who they would continue to be as their family grew. And grow it did. 2 years after William was born, Maisie gave birth to twin girls, Alice and Emma, who had their mother's honey-colored eyes and their father's strong will. The house was suddenly full of noise and chaos and laughter, with William toddling around trying to be helpful, and the twins demanding attention at all hours. "We might need to add on to the house," Xavier said one evening, surveying the toys scattered across every surface, and the 3 children currently squabbling over who got to sit in Maisie's lap. "Or just buy more storage," Maisie suggested with a laugh, settling the dispute by pulling all 3 children into her embrace, one on her lap and one on either side. "I think we have enough bedrooms for now." But Xavier could see the love in her eyes when she looked at their children, and he knew she was thinking what he was thinking. Their family might not be complete yet. Sure enough, 3 years after the twins were born, another baby arrived, a daughter they named Grace for the easy labor and perfect health she brought with her. The children grew up surrounded by horses and love. William showed his mother's talent for training, spending hours in the barn from the time he could walk, while Alice had her father's head for business and was already calculating profits from horse sales by the age of 8. Emma loved the animals but was more interested in drawing them than riding them, her artistic talent evident early on. And Grace, the baby, was still finding her path, but showed signs of inheriting the best of both parents. The ranch prospered beyond Xavier's wildest dreams. Their horses became known throughout California for their quality and temperament, and they had buyers waiting months for foals from their best mares. They'd expanded the land twice, bought additional breeding stock, and built a reputation for integrity and excellence. But success was measured in more than money or acres. Xavier measured it in the sound of his children's laughter echoing through the house, in the feeling of Maisie's hand in his as they walked their land in the evenings, in the knowledge that they'd built something meaningful together. On a May evening 15 years after the night he'd found her protecting a newborn foal in the rain, Xavier and Maisie stood at the fence of the main paddock, watching Dawn, now a mature mare of 15 with several foals of her own, graze peacefully in the golden light. Their children were scattered around the property, William helping the hired hands with the evening feeding, the twins riding their ponies in the training ring, and Grace playing in the dirt nearby with a collection of toy horses. "You remember that night?" Maisie asked, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. "When you found me?" "Every detail," Xavier said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "The rain, the way you looked so fierce protecting that foal, the way I knew even then that you were going to change my life." "I was terrified," Maisie admitted. "Of losing Star, of losing the ranch, of failing my father's memory. And then this cowboy showed up and gave me his coat and stayed with me through the storm, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore." "You never will be again," Xavier promised, pulling her closer. "We are in this together, all of it. The storms and the sunshine, the struggles and the triumphs." Maisie turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. His hair had silver threads now, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day they'd met. "I love you, Xavier O'Sullivan. Thank you for stopping on that trail, for seeing me and staying. Thank you for everything we have built together." "I love you too," Xavier said, leaning down to kiss her with the same passion and tenderness he'd felt on that first kiss in the hayloft so many years ago. "Thank you for saying yes to all of it, to the partnership, to the marriage, to this life. You are my everything." As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the O'Sullivan family gathered on the porch of their home. William came up from the barn, dirt-streaked but happy. The twins rode up and dismounted, leading their ponies to the hitching post. Grace ran to her mother, demanding to be picked up. Mrs. Chen called from inside that dinner was ready, and Dawn whinnied from her paddock, a sound of contentment and peace. Xavier looked around at his family, at the land they'd built together, at the life they'd created from one chance meeting in a storm. He thought about how one decision to stop, to help, to stay had changed everything. He thought about Maisie's courage that night, protecting a helpless foal when she had nothing left to give, and his own instinct to stop and help when he could have just as easily ridden past. "Come on," Maisie said, taking his hand and leading him toward the house. "Let us go eat. Tomorrow we have that buyer coming from San Francisco to look at William's colt, and I want to go over the paperwork with you tonight." Xavier laughed, because of course she did. Business and family were woven together so tightly in their lives that there was no separating them. "Always working," he teased. "Always," she agreed, grinning at him over her shoulder. That is what partners do. They walked into their home together, surrounded by their children and the warm glow of lamplight, the smell of Mrs. Chen's cooking filling the air. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to emerge. The same stars that had watched over them that first night when a cowboy found a woman protecting a newborn foal in the rain, and gave her his coat and stayed. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Xavier and Maisie sat together in their bedroom, reviewing the paperwork for the next day's sale. But eventually, the papers were set aside, and they simply sat together, Maisie leaning against Xavier's chest while he held her close. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped that night?" Maisie asked quietly. Xavier considered it. "I think I would have spent the rest of my life looking for you without knowing what I was searching for. I think I would have built my ranch and made my money and been successful by everyone's measure, except the one that mattered. I would have been alone." "I would have lost Star and her foal," Maisie said. "Thomas and I probably would have lost the ranch shortly after. I would have had to find work somewhere, maybe as a governess or a teacher. I might have married eventually, settled for someone practical who needed a wife more than he wanted one. I would have been safe but not happy. Instead, we found each other," Xavier said, "and built something better than either of us could have created alone." "More than that," Maisie corrected. "We found love, real love, the kind that weathers storms and grows stronger with time. The kind worth fighting for." Xavier kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Always worth fighting for, every single day." They sat there for a while longer, comfortable in the silence, before finally climbing into bed. As Xavier drifted off to sleep with Maisie in his arms, he sent up a silent prayer of thanks for that rainy May night 15 years ago, for the choice to stop and help, for the woman who'd been brave enough to kneel in a storm for a helpless creature, and for the life they'd built together. The years continued to pass, bringing their own joys and challenges. William grew into a fine young man, taking over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch and showing the same skill with horses his mother had. At 20, he married a sweet girl named Catherine from San Jose, and within a year, Xavier and Maisie became grandparents to a baby boy named after Xavier. The twins followed different paths. Alice, with her head for numbers and business, moved to San Francisco and opened an office managing horse sales for multiple ranches across California, including her parents. She revolutionized the way horses were bought and sold in the state, bringing a level of professionalism and organization that had been lacking. She married a lawyer named James and had 3 children, visiting the ranch often but clearly happiest in the city. Emma's artistic talent led her to study art in Los Angeles, where she specialized in painting horses and Western scenes. Her work gained recognition, and she eventually opened a gallery in San Jose, where she lived above the store with her husband, Michael, who was a photographer. Together, they documented the changing face of California, preserving the history of the ranching life even as the state modernized around them. Grace, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in California to do so. She studied under a doctor in San Francisco, fighting prejudice and skepticism to earn her degree, then returned to San Jose to open a practice specializing in large animals. She worked closely with her parents' ranch and others in the area, becoming known for her skill and compassion. She married late, at 32, to a fellow veterinarian named Robert, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up as comfortable in a barn as in a parlor. Through it all, Xavier and Maisie remained the heart of the family, their love for each other and for their children binding everyone together. The ranch became a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, with multiple generations of O'Sullivans filling the house and spilling out onto the porches and lawns. Dawn lived to the remarkable age of 28, producing 15 foals in her lifetime, each one carrying her gentle temperament and good conformation. When she finally passed peacefully in her sleep on a warm summer night, the whole family mourned. They buried her on a hill overlooking the main paddock with a simple marker that read, "Dawn, first of the line, saved in storm, gave life to many." Maisie stood at the grave, tears streaming down her face, and Xavier held her as she cried. "She started it all," Maisie said. "If not for her, we might never have met." "Then I owe that horse everything," Xavier said softly. "Everything that matters." As Xavier and Maisie moved into their 50s and then 60s, they gradually handed over more of the ranch's operations to William and his wife, though Maisie never entirely stopped working with the horses. Even into her 70s, she could be found in the barn most mornings, checking on the mares and foals, offering advice and guidance to the younger generation. Xavier's hair turned completely silver, and his hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but he still rode out with William several times a week to check the herds. He'd built a reputation as one of the most respected horsemen in California, and buyers still sought his opinion on bloodlines and breeding decisions. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a massive celebration at the ranch. Over 200 people attended, including some of the first buyers who'd taken a chance on the young O'Sullivan breeding program 40 years earlier. There were speeches and toasts, music and dancing, and a presentation of a beautiful oil painting Emma had created showing Xavier and Maisie as they'd looked on their wedding day, standing in front of the barn with horses all around them. 40 years, Xavier said in his speech, his arm around Maisie's waist. 40 years since I found this remarkable woman in the rain, protecting a newborn foal with nothing but her own body and will. 40 years since she agreed to be my partner, first in business and then in life. I thought I was successful before I met her, thought I had everything figured out. But Maisie showed me what real partnership looks like, what it means to build something together, to weather storms together, to create a legacy that extends beyond ourselves. He turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was as clear as it had been on their wedding day. "You are my heart, Maisie O'Sullivan. You are the reason I wake up grateful every morning and go to sleep content every night. Thank you for 40 years of adventure, of love, of building this beautiful life together. I cannot wait to see what the next 40 bring." Maisie, who'd been trying not to cry, gave up the fight and let the tears flow. "You old fool," she said with a shaky laugh. "You know we probably do not have another 40 years. Then we will make the most of whatever time we have," Xavier said, and kissed her in front of everyone, to the applause and cheers of their family and friends. They had another 10 years together after that anniversary. 10 years of watching their grandchildren grow and start families of their own. 10 years of seeing their breeding program continue to flourish under William's management. 10 years of sitting together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over land they'd worked and loved for half a century. Xavier passed first, at 82, from a heart that simply wore out after a life well lived. He died peacefully in his sleep with Maisie beside him, just as he'd wanted. His funeral was attended by hundreds, a testament to the respect and affection he'd earned over his lifetime. They buried him on the hill next to Dawn, because Maisie insisted that was where he'd want to be, overlooking the ranch he'd built and the horses he'd loved. Maisie lived another 5 years without him, though she told her children she felt like she was just waiting to join him. She spent those years surrounded by family, passing on her knowledge and experience to the next generations, making sure the legacy she and Xavier had built would continue. She watched her great-grandchildren take their first steps, held her newest great-great-grandchild in her arms, and took satisfaction in knowing that the O'Sullivan name was associated with quality, integrity, and love. She passed on a spring morning much like the one when Xavier had found her 55 years earlier. It had rained the night before, and the world was fresh and green and new. She slipped away quietly in her sleep, and her children liked to think she'd gone to find Xavier, that wherever he was, they were together again. They buried her beside him on the hill, with a marker that read, Maisie Sullivan O'Sullivan, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She gave her heart to horses, and to one cowboy who gave her his coat and stayed. The ranch continued to thrive for generations after their passing, run by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each one adding their own innovations while maintaining the core values Xavier and Maisie had established. The O'Sullivan horses remained among the finest in California, sought after by buyers who appreciated quality and careful breeding. And sometimes, on rainy spring nights, the ranch hands swore they could see two figures standing on the hill by the graves, looking out over the land they'd loved. An older couple, holding hands, forever watching over the legacy they'd built together. A cowboy who'd stopped to help a woman in need, and a woman who'd been brave enough to protect the helpless, who'd found in each other everything they'd been looking for without knowing they were searching. Their love story became family legend, passed down through the generations, embellished a bit with each telling but always returning to the core truth. That real love begins with kindness, is built on partnership and respect, and endures beyond death itself. That sometimes the most important decision you can make is to stop and help, to give someone your coat when they're cold, to stay when leaving would be easier, and that a newborn foal struggling in a storm can be the beginning of everything that matters.